Hey to all you guys, what's going on YouTube? It's 3D Res. Welcome back to our Pokemon Pocket. And we're just over 2 weeks away until we get the very first real expansion for the game. I decided to look back at the meta. I decided to see what was up and coming, what kind of fell flat on its face. And in order to do this, we have to look at the data from pretty much the biggest tournament every weekend, Days Pocket Weekly. Now, this is over on Limitless. I'll obviously put this into the description below so you guys can take a look at all of this stuff for yourself. But we went right back to week number 9. So we're going to go from 9 to 10 to 11 just to gauge a better idea of how the meta somehow fluctuated over the week, what appeared on some weeks and what didn't appear on other weeks, and pretty much what dominated. So obviously in the Swiss rounds for week number 9, this was where we had the introduced ourselves to Celebi. And of course, we naturally thought that Celebi was going to be all over the place. It was going to be dominating, it was going to be winning everything from this week going forward. Spoiler alert, it did not. But we did see an interesting combo in the form of Aerodactyl and Primeape. And of course, Aerodactyl, funny enough, appears down here as well with Mew, and up here with a Leak Duck. So we had the Aerodactyl and Primeape combo 3 times over within the top 32. And of course it is nestled amongst everything else as well. Now, the Aerodactyl and Primeape combo actually does do wonders. Because I remember on that week, people were running this thing. And of course it has a non-EX Aerodactyl in there. For maybe just to stall at the very end, try and get rid of your opponent's big Pokemon. And then you can come in with whatever else. It's such a very it's such a very novelty, right? It's one of these things that you don't really expect to work. On paper, maybe. In theory, possibly. But in action, not so much. Because obviously Aerodactyl and Primeape has its own weaknesses. And being up against the likes of Mewtwo, Primeape is going to get absolutely murdered. Aerodactyl, Pikachu just completely stomps it. But the interesting thing about this, though, is there wasn't really anything like this beforehand. And people were just like, wow, what do I do? We're scrambling here, people. But it's interesting, though, because going into the play to win rounds, the Aerodactyl and Primeape only got a 1-1. It didn't really quite hit the mark, which is obviously where the Pikachus and the Mewtwo's came out. Now, that's not to say it wasn't bad. Oh no, it was good, don't get me wrong. But like I say, it just didn't quite hit the mark and it didn't get there to what they wanted. And of course, this is when we saw the Mewtwo and Gardevoir winning it yet again. Now, notice here, okay, that the Celebi is down here 1-1. Over here, it was Celebi and Executor, not Celebi and Superior, which reached the top. But Celebi and your Superior did get there. Now, bear that in mind, okay? Because obviously, with the weeks to come, things did change. So what I also like the look of here as well is that you do still have the likes of your Pikachus hanging around. Pikachu's Ebstreakers most notably. Pikachu Raichu is still around here a little bit. And of course then you have your other stuff in between. Charizard and Arcanine wasn't really prominent this week, but it did slowly creep up. And I think it did catch people by surprise. Especially being down here as well on number 17. And of course we had Blaine over here, which went 0-1. And the Alakazam went 0-1 as well. But moving into week 10. Now, this is where things started to become a little bit spicier than what they were before. So as you can clearly tell here, the Aerodactyl and Primeape has now been literally given the boot. And it's been replaced by the likes of Gyarados and Greninja. This is something very interesting. Because obviously we all know that Lead won this week with the Gyarados and Greninja. However, Lead was down here 9-1. Does that make much of a difference? Not really, because Gyarados and Greninja did appear 5 times within the top 15. And of course it appeared even more down here as well, within the top 32. But as you compare that to week number 9, Gyarados and Greninja only appeared, rough take, about 3 times within the top 32. That is where the meta kind of fluctuates, and obviously at this moment in time, people were realizing that Gyarados was actually no pushover, and it was getting the job done on multiple different occasions. And of course we see the Arcanine and Charizard popping up, and the likes of Executor and Celebi reappearing twice over. Now, this is where the Pikachu started to fall down a little bit, and of course more Mewtwo starting to appear. As you can see here on week 9, obviously your Blaine's were still around then. But come week 10, Blaine wasn't even here anymore. It completely disappeared, just went poof, like a puff of smoke. And then we go on over to the play to win rounds for week 10. And of course, as we know, Gyarados and Greninja won via the use from lead. And this is where the Arcanine and Charizard started to creep up a little bit. And of course, the Aerodactyl and Primeape returned here. But that is the only time it did. And all of the Celebes and Executors were pretty much rock bottom. They didn't even get more than 1 win. And they had, how many was it? They had 5 attempts to get more than 1 win, but they failed. But it doesn't mean it's not an established deck. Obviously, this was when people were still trying to figure stuff out, I was assuming. And moving into week 11, which we'll get on in just a moment's time, that is where things started to change up. I wouldn't say drastically, but that is when the Flavor of the Week decks kind of didn't do as well as what they did in their respective weeks beforehand. So, week 11 just gone. Literally yesterday, right? We had Celebi and Executor finally topping the Swiss round leaderboard. Finally topping the Swiss round leaderboard. Need I say any more to that? And of course we also had the Charizard and Arcanine yet again high up here. Was it the first week where we had 2 10-0 decks? Yes it was, yes. This is the first week where we had 2 10-0 decks and a lot of 9-1s. And a lot of ties here as well, wow. What is going on here, people? What is going on here? But we had a load of 9-1s. Our first literally tied 10 deck. And it was quite surprising now because the Aerodactyl and Farfetch'd is reappearing higher up this time. The Aerodactyl and Primeapes are now dropping. However, they are reappearing in the likes of different spots. And of course, the Greninja and Gyarados combo is right down here at number 22. But now the Articuno and Greninja is starting to creep up a little bit more. Moving into the final 2 weeks, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, but if I did, I would probably say it looked like this 10 times over. But maybe we will see something new appear. Who knows? Maybe I'll make this a weekly effort. Who knows? But we still do see the likes of Mewtwo and Gardevoir. However, this time around, we are seeing far more Pikachu and Zebstreakers appearing. So going into the week 11 playing to win rounds, Pikachu and Zebstreaker won. That doesn't mean that the other stuff is bad. It just means it didn't quite hit the mark. Nope, I use that term quite a bit now because it does pretty much show that some of this stuff just does quite not hit the mark when it comes to winning the big money. But when it comes to essentially stomping in the Swiss rounds, that is where things are of a different story. So we do still see our Charizards. However, Charizard and Arcanine has completely dropped this week. Completely dropped. It just dropped. It just completely went right down. And of course down here we have our Aerodactyls and Primates failing to show up until of course the number 5 spot. And still having multiple Mewtwo appearances. And the Celebi and Executor has now dropped. It had only appeared 3 times, which I was quite surprised at. The Greninja Articuno failed to get a win, completely failed, like a lot of other stuff did, which I thought was going to happen. But it's going to show that sometimes the old heads do still appear. They do still appear. And it's not really surprising, because they are consistent enough, they are efficient enough in dealing with the meta. They can easily pick apart whatever comes out what's going to be new, because obviously you know how it's going to interact. If you get very unlucky with your stuff, you're probably game over at that point. But there are some really different stuff in their decks. And I am picking up from where I left off. And we are going to be looking at weeks 9, 10 and 11 Swiss round decks and the winner decks of that week. So sign off with Aerodactyl and Primeape on week 9. This was the most won deck with on the Swiss rounds. And of course we're looking at Holon Mentor. Now, Aerodactyl and Primeape is a deck I have been looking at quite closely. I've been looking at trying to use it myself. However, I don't have double Aerodactyl EX at the moment. But once I do, I think I will definitely try this, because it is an interesting blend of the brand new Mankey, which, by the way, is literally promo Haunter. Literally promo Haunter. And of course, we have the old Mankey now. Brand new Mankey with the old Mankey. But is not the Mankey that actually gets damage if it is self-harmed. Bear that in mind. So this is what I'm kind of intrigued about, because when you do actually go ahead and look on over to the matches won and lost, they actually lost against the Executor and Mew EX deck. Now, Merkur then went on to lose against a Gardevoir and Mewtwo deck, but their deck list was very standard. It was obviously the Executor, the Celebi and the Mew. But I think with the Aerodactyl and the Primeape, obviously it picked up a fair amount of wins against the Pikachu line, against the Gyarados and Greninja as well, even one against the Charizard and Arcanine here. And obviously, as we know, a week later, it was the Gyarados and Greninja winning, and of course Arcanine was on the rise. But with Aerodactyl and Primeape, I'm actually quite surprised with this deck, because there's no non-EX Aerodactyl in here. When I was talking to someone in this stream about this yesterday, they told me that they run a very similar deck to this. However, they don't run double Mankey. Like, they don't run one Mankey and another Mankey. Just not the same. But instead, they run one non-EX Aerodactyl. And they're saying it almost acts as a last contingency plan. So, obviously, if you can hit that coin flip, you can then put the opponent's active Pokemon back into the deck, which could easily net you a win if you're on the road to trying to get to a certain Finn, or you may not have a Sabrina or anything along those lines. That's where they said non-EX Aerodactyl actually comes into play. But to not see it here is quite interesting. But moving on to the actual winning deck of that week, it was the Mewtwo Gardevoir. There's really not much else to say about this. Obviously, this now runs the Jinx line. So before, Jinx was something that many people just didn't really consider to be good. But Jinx at the time is now creeping up there. And of course, it toppled 3 Pikachu Zebstreakers along the way. It toppled a fair amount of variety down here as well. Oh, it actually lost as well, funny enough, to another Mewtwo Gardevoir. And also tied to a Mewtwo Gardevoir. So this did not do well against Mewtwo Gardevoirs. But somehow it won on the week. But yes, it toppled the Pikachu Zebstreakers, toppled the Executors, and it won that week too. And as I say, it's a very standard Mewtwo deck. There's really not much else to say about that. You guys know the gist of this. It now runs the Mythical Slab. And ultimately, I think this is where Mewtwo decks are a whole. This is where they now come together. I have seen many Mewtwo decks running Mew inside of it. It just falls flat on its face, honestly. It doesn't really quite hit the mark. But now with the new introducing of the Mythical Slabs, it really does pick itself up, especially if you can't find the Curliers or find the Gardevoirs or whatever it is. But I think that's where now the Mewtwo decks are being solidified. So moving on to week 10, we did obviously see the literally rise of Greninja. And of course, Gyarados to go along with it. So it's funny enough because these are exactly the same two decks. However, there could only be one winner, and that winner was indeed Elite. As you guys know, as I did cover it on the video itself. But it went through a heck of a load of Mewtwo God Wars just to get here. A heck of a load of them. And it also topped out another Greninja and another Gyarados deck. And of course, if you look at the other one, their line was different, right? They had a lot of Executors in here, 4 of them to be exact. But they lost against this Aerodactyl Primeape. Now, let's see if this is the same deck as the one from the week before. It kind of is. Apart from this time, it's running double of the same Mankey. It is not the promo Mankey, but it is also running only one Marsh Shadow. I'm intrigued by this because where on earth are people just not putting in the promo Mankey anymore? Is it not desirable? Maybe because of the self-harm perhaps? It's interesting. If you guys know, or if you guys don't play the promo Mankey anymore, let me know, please. Because I would love to find out how this actually works. And how it blends in. Especially with the Aerodactyls. And especially yet again, there's no non-EX Aerodactyl here. Who knows, maybe there's something I'm completely missing. Maybe promo Mankey's a thing of the past. But whatever it is though, that was the winning deck of that week. The Greninja and Gyarados. As I say, that went straight up on the rise. And you guys literally saw that all over the ladder. All over. And you still do as well. Which is kind of mind-boggling, especially weeks later. Something like that still has much of an impact. So moving on to week 11, it was the Executor and Celebi. Now this was literally the weekend just gone. So 2 days ago now, not 1 day, is now 2 days ago. And the winning deck here was indeed a Pikachu Zebstrika. However, the one that won all of the Swiss round matches the most was the Executor and Celebi. And it literally plowed through a lot of Mewtwo God Wars. And it took out double Aerodactyl Primeapes. These things are appearing more often now. And it is very intriguing to be seeing this. Very intriguing. Because as I say, I'm watching this deck very closely. And I'm on the verge of trying to make it myself. So looking at the deck list, we can see not a lot of a divergence from the original. Literally Celebi Executor deck. And there's really not a whole load of wow difference, you know. It's your standard Celebi deck, but instead now it throws Executor inside of here. But the thing I do with my own Executor Celebi deck, or should I say Executor Superior deck, cut out the Celebi, get out of here. I don't like using that card. But ultimately, I like to run one EX Executor and one of the new Executors. The new Executor obviously being a Grass Alakazam, but its damage drops off after the third energy. I think it actually has a home here. And it kind of works. And it's pretty dangerous as well if and when you can actually pop off with it. But to see people still running the old faithful, the old reliable, doesn't surprise me. Because obviously Executor EX is an absolute powerhouse, it's an absolute beast. This is probably one of the most consistent cards in a whole entire game, I would say. Having this literally paired with Superior, you got yourself a 2 retreat cost at that point instead of the original 3. It's very nice to see Executor being used again. Obviously, at times it was a lot of Venusaur, and even when Celebi first came out, it was a lot of Celebi, Delmise. Executor never really paired itself in there all that much, but it did over the weeks to come. And it feels like now people are running this line, and obviously Delmise is gone, right? It's now Executor, Celebi, Superior, obviously. That's the true combo, that's the true meta deck. And it's going to be intriguing to find out what's going to be happening in the expansion, and what cards potentially could topple this. Same going for Pikachu, what electric cards could topple Pikachu. Same going for Water, what could topple Gyarados. So on and so forth, right? We need to actually find this out immediately when the cards come out themselves in the end of January. But looking at the Pikachu Zebstrika deck, this is your bog standard one at the moment. It is running the Dedenne, and of course it is running the brand new Electabuzz, which by the way, is actually pretty desirable by itself. It is a 2 cost, and it's going to be attacking the opponent on the, literally one of your opponent's Pokemon by 40 damage. It's kind of a buffed up Zebstrika. However, it is losing less health, which is kind of what you got to expect there. But you can pair this with the likes of Surge. However, in a deck like this, you're not really going to be doing such a thing. But this is a very typical deck, I would say. And it does have the double Zebstrika in here. And it has the 1 Zapdos. I remember way back when all of these Pikachu decks were running around with double Zapdos, double Pikachu, double Electrode. It was crazy. It was a crazy sight to see. But now it feels like this is kind of the solidified Pikachu deck. And obviously you can drop Dedenne maybe for another Zapdos perhaps, maybe another Electabuzz, or maybe Electro, whatever it is, right? You can drop certain cards here, but this is more than likely the deck to run Pikachu in now. And I think over the weeks people have come to realize that consistency is key. Obviously having efficient cards in there is key as well, but having cards in there that are both consistent and efficient, that is where we are now seeing in these tournaments, and especially the meta games for them. And that is where the meta decks are now just congealed together. They've come together, and we are now seeing what I think is probably the final meta before the expansion comes out. Obviously, we've got another tournament next week, and a tournament week after that. So you've got 2 more until we see the new cards unveiled. But yes, I can't wait to finally see what's going to be toppling a lot of stuff. I know there's going to be something out there that's going to immediately skyrocket. But whatever it is though, guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you a like button, hit that subscribe button as well. Let me know in the comments below if you guys run any of these decks. If you think some of these decks are overrated. If you think some are underrated. Who knows? Maybe I'm not alone out there when I say that a lot of these decks, they're kind of stale at this point. But as I say, once we get the expansion cards at the end of January, things are going to change for the better. And I really, really do literally look forward to seeing what's going to happen. I know, guys, take care, stay safe, all the good stuff. I'll let you know what you're doing for this video. Next live stream, go ahead and play some Pokemon Pocket. Go ahead and play some meta decks if that's your thing. But other than that, though, guys, goodbye for now. Bye-bye.